Olá, eu sou a Clarissa Wolff, eu sou escritora e eu estou aqui com a Kristen Roupenian, que escreveu Cat Person, o conto mais lido da história da revista New Yorker, que teve quase 5 milhões de visualizações. A gente vai conversar sobre literatura e gatos, é claro. So I want to dive a bit deeper into your stories.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I really enjoy is Look at Your Game Girl. And it talks about the relationship between this girl who has freckles and she meets a boy named Charlie, and she's listening to a song that it's by Charles Manson.
Right.
So there's the whole thing, and then there's a crime happening. So I wanted to know how you came to the story. How did you create it? What's your story about this story?
Yeah, so that story I wrote while I was at a workshop called Clarion in the States. It's sort of a sci-fi fantasy horror workshop, and you write a ton. You write a new story every week, and I wrote that story probably 3 weeks in, so it came to me very fast, and I wrote the first draft very quickly. And I was thinking about a bunch of different things. I was actually thinking less about Charles Manson in that moment than I was about Polly Klaas, who, I don't know if you're familiar, but she's a girl in the early 90s. She was abducted from a sleepover party when she was like 10 or 11. Basically, I was about the same age as she was when that happened, and I remember thinking about how, or when I was writing the story, I was thinking about how when you're a kid, you always get a story in your mind that's sort of like the example of the worst thing that can happen, sort of a real life horror story. And I was thinking about writing a story where someone had a much closer connection to a crime like that, a crime that sort of became part of the larger culture. And so I wrote that story with her, like the main character, Jessica, is growing up and has, like, she brushes really closely to the Polly Klaas murder and sort of shapes her for the rest of her life. And it was I was thinking about how these things, even when we're not directly affected by things like this, how does it shape our lives as women and our understanding of what it means to be a woman in the world, to be close to incidents like that.
Emma Cline has an essay after she wrote The Girls where she talks about being kind of involved by letter with an older guy, and that she didn't realize by then that she could be in danger if the guy was differently. So do you think that these stories kind of work as a cautionary tale for younger women? How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I would never think of myself as writing cautionary tales. You know, like I would never think that the lesson is, and I think the opposite in so many ways of what I want to do is to sort of shake your fingers at girls and say, be careful. I think rather what I'm interested in is, like, you grow up steeped in cautionary tales, right? Or at least I did. And one of the things that I thought of when I was thinking of the collection as a whole, one of the things I was thinking about was like the scary stories we have in our heads about as girls, and how some of those stories are, you know, tales of true crime, right? Bad things that could happen, things that happen to your friends that they tell you about, things your mom tells you, but also like fairy tales, right? Like all this like mix of different stories that you use and you're sort of taking in when you're 11, 12, 13 to think about like what is safe and what isn't, and how wrong sometimes those stories are. I feel like when I think back to my when I was a teenager, my sense that like it was dangerous to go outside at night in the dark, right? But it wasn't dangerous necessarily to talk to a man who seemed like he might be about my age because my friends knew him, so it must be safe, right? It's so hard to understand where real danger comes from. And I do have that exact experience as Emma Cline, where I look back and I'm like, how could I have missed that? But you do, right? Like, because you're a kid and the world is complicated and messy, and like there isn't a good guide always about how to behave.
So going back to The Good Guy, you said that the story was, you think that somehow Columbine and all the other stuff behind it on your mind might helped in the formation of the story. But I want to know, putting Good Guy next to Cat Person, if you think that Robert perhaps could be in the same mindset as Ted, how do you see the characters and the stories conversing and talking to each other?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it was a choice, a conscious choice to put them back to back because I wanted people to think about them together. I think they certainly have things in common in terms of their age is similar. They're sort of alternately insecure and kind of hostile relationship to the women in their lives. I think they absolutely share. It seems important to me to recognize that, like, to me, the fundamental thing about Robert is that we don't get an insight into his head, right? We don't ever quite get to know who he is. So he's kind of a Schrodinger's cat, right? Like, where it could be multiple possibilities and we never quite put our finger on who he is, except for maybe at the very end. Whereas Ted, I have a different relationship to him because I wrote from his point of view. And when I'm writing from a character's point of view, I'm trying to get as deep as I can into their mind and, like, ultimately have a kind of sympathy for them, even if what they're doing is, like, clearly terrible, or, like, I wouldn't make the same choices they would. And so I think Ted, we have at least it's possible to have the empathy that comes from knowledge, even if we have to have some distance from him. And I think he is, I try, whenever I'm writing a story from someone's point of view, I try to give them at least a moment of self-awareness, a moment where they're like, I don't know why I'm doing this, and I might keep on doing it, but in this moment I recognize I don't want to be here. I don't want to do that. And we don't get that in Robert, which I feel like is why people, like, it's harder to have sympathy for him, right? He doesn't doubt himself in the way that Ted ultimately, he does, right? Like, he has a kind of reckoning where and that's sort of the whole, like, instigation of the story, where he's like, what the hell is happening to me? How did I get here? I think that moment of self-awareness is in some ways all you can really ask for from a human, right? To try and figure out why they are the way they are.
Okay, so you have a story about a girl, a woman, who does this spell to create the love of her life.
Yeah.
And in the end, the story kind of turns sideways.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, how do you see the relationship between love and getting hurt? Is loving someone the ultimate ache, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be. I always want, you know, sometimes I think when people read the book and they're like, this is so dark, don't you believe in love? Do you think everyone is terrible? And I'm like, no, you know, there are many varieties
Half of them.
love. Yeah, just a little bit. There are glimmers of hope. They just maybe aren't here in these stories. But no, I do think that love and desire, they do open up into really dark spaces of, like, fear and sort of, fear and loss and pain, because it's all about, like, the ego is such a sort of, like, cruel figure, right? And I think so much often with love is that it's about how it gets tangled up in power, right? Like, how easy it is to move from, I love this person, I want to be with them, to I want them to love me, to I want them to do what I tell them to do, to I want them only to do what I tell them to do, to, like, wanting to sort of consume them so that they're not even there anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, that sort of, that falling into a kind of narcissism or, like, control. And I think with the story Scarred that we were talking about, it's a kind of fable about that. It's the kind of fable of, like, if someone you were able to create your dream man, right? Who was exactly what you wanted in every respect. Wouldn't that person be a kind of slave? Would they have an autonomy from you? Or is the desire to have someone who fulfills your every wish also a kind of tyrannical desire to not want to let people be any different from you or have any space from you? And so I think she's just the darkest possible version of how that kind of dynamic might play out.
So I'm going to show you the pictures of 3 cats, and I want you to tell me about their owners.
Okay, I'm very excited.
So this is the first one.
Ooh, beautiful. Look at those eyes. And a literary cat. Okay, that cat belongs to an eccentric woman who lives in a big, kind of falling down mansion with an old swimming pool, sort of like out of Sunset Boulevard, if you've ever seen that. And she wears a caftan and kind of floats around, and she talks to her cat like he's a person, and they read books together out loud at night. That's who that person is.
I love that. Okay, so the second one is this one.
Look at this guy. It's a little rascal. So cute. Oh my goodness. All right, I say that cat, and again, I know you said one of them might be yours, so I'm gonna put that out of my head.
Yeah.
That cat belongs to a college student who is not supposed to have a cat, but she loves her cat so much that she smuggled him in to her dorm room and lets him sort of sneak around the dorms when no one's looking, and he's become like a secret pet of the whole college community, even though he's also like an illegal cat who's somewhere he doesn't belong. So he's there.
Okay, so the last one.
Ooh, pretty. Wow. That cat has excellent taste in literature, belongs to someone, yes, who knows all the best things to read, who has flawless taste, maybe also a writer who, just that cat sits at the foot of its owner who's a writer while she sips coffee and types out her stories, and they have a great life together.
Okay, so now I'm going to tell you, all of them are mine.
Oh my God.
Her name is Marie Antoinette. She's the sassy one.
She's great.
He's Leonard Cohen.
Oh, perfect.
He's the most caring. And she's Karenina. And she's a Virgo too. And she's kind of like the princess.
Oh my God. That's amazing. I feel like even though I got their owners wrong since I didn't know it was you, I did get their personalities correctly.
But kind of like all of the characters could be.
Exactly.
Now I want to know, last thing, how is it to be a cat owner?
It's great. Having a cat is like so purely delightful. When I got my cat, I thought it was going to be a lot of work somehow. I just sort of associated it with having a dog, which I know is like a ton of work and kind of a full-time job. And I have to say, knock on wood, our cat is the easiest creature in the world. I like look around, I'm like, it's like having a living teddy bear, like some kind of robotic creature who just comes in and is adorable and rolls around and like charms you and then leaves to go do his own work. It's just like the best thing. I think I'll have a cat for the rest of my life.
Give us one really good tip for writers.
That is so hard. There is no single answer, but I would say just, I'll pass it on. I had a professor once who, in addition to, we were in workshop and submitting stories, she said, write one secret story that you would never want to show anyone, right? That's like so risky or embarrassing or weird that you don't want to show anyone. She's like, write that story and submit it to me, and like it'll free something in you. And I think that's it. I think that's great advice, to like write something that feels so private you never want to tell anyone about it. Just the act of doing that can really free you. So I recommend that. That's the thing to do. Yeah, thank you.